Today's topic, how many of you today came with some expectations? Anybody? Some people come just because they come every month. Okay, what were your expectations of today? Just shout them out at me real quick.
Knowledge.
Knowledge, okay.
Love.
Love, you want to talk about love today? We got love. We can talk about love today for sure. What else? Did anybody come with any expectations that we were going to have an adult version of the sex talk? Good, okay, a few of you. That's great. You will not be disappointed. Oh, and you wonder why I'm shaking, right? I had to give a sex talk to my children who are now in their 30s, when they were younger, and that wasn't a lot of fun. I know you've all been through that as well, but I think that was harder on them than it was on me. Did you guys ever have that experience, right? And so today we're going to be talking a little bit about intimacy and what that looks like as we enter life's later stages, which, by the way, I consider myself over 50 in that camp. Anybody else have anything that they hope to learn today when they saw the topic, heard the topic, or somebody invited them today? Yes, ma'am.
The pros and cons of shacking up if we're being married and waiting and all that.
Sure. The pros and cons of shacking up and waiting and maybe not getting married or getting married. So we'll talk about some of the things to consider for sure, right, on that. Thank you for that. Yep. Anybody else? Yeah.
Have some good laughs.
Have some good, we're going to have plenty of laughs, I promise, because if we don't, we're in trouble. Because this is one of those topics that if we're not laughing about it, then we're in big trouble. Anything else?
Tips about good relationships and finding love.
Oh, tips about good relationships and finding love. Okay, very good. I like it. All right, anybody else? Okay, very good. So I'm going to just kind of do a quick disclaimer on this topic. Anytime we prepare our schedule a year, we prepared a year in advance, right? So like this was last year, we're preparing for this year's schedule, and this topic came up, and it was a collaborative effort. Several of us got together, education partners and some of the other folks that I network with who serve people, I'm going to say over 65, right, as kind of a general rule, in various capacities, legal, financial, housing, social services, all kinds of things. And basically I said, what is something that's not being talked about that really should be being talked about? That was my question. Because here, we're not here about duplicity. We don't want you to do what everybody else is doing. We're trying to offer programming that is a little different than everybody else. And across the board, a number of people said, we've got to start talking about health, wellness, and specifically sex in older age. And I went, oh, great, who's going to do that? And I looked around and they went, you are. And I said, okay, I'm up for it, but you got to help me. So this talk is, even though I'm giving the talk, this is a group effort. There's been several of us that have contributed to the points that I'm going to share today. And I am not the expert. I'm not Dr. Ruth. Those of you who know Dr. Ruth, right? That's not me. That's not my forte. Although I'm not afraid to speak about these topics in public. It's not my expertise. So I'm only going to share with you what I know through research and through anecdotal reports and through my own personal experience, myself or with family. So that's my disclaimer. We did change the title. Some of you may be looking at an old schedule that we have, and you may say, well, Nikki, that's not the title that was on the schedule. You're right. It was modified. We were asked, it was a little risque for some people, and so we were asked to modify the topic, and we did that, and happily did that. The conversation isn't a whole lot different than what it was going to be, but the topic has changed slightly, so if you're wondering about that, which some people have asked me. So, are you ready? You ready to have an adult sex talk, amongst other things? Yeah? All right, good. Thank you for that. All right, I'm going to sit up here. I've had a couple people ask me to sit when I speak up here without a panel because I have a tendency to roam the stage, and that's never a good thing. All right, so you've heard me talk about this before. So just to recap, those of you who haven't been here this year so far, we have a theme that we've been following. It's based on a book by Susan Milner Golden called Stage Not Age. It's a great book, but it's really for marketers, and it's not meant for lay people really. But she outlines in her book how the older we are able to live to, the longevity issue, right? We're no longer living till 70s or 80s or 90s even. People are living well into their hundreds in some cases. Then there are different stages of life that we have not contemplated in the past because we didn't anticipate them. So kind of the game plan has been altered or modified, kind of like this morning. We had to follow the signs to find the parking lot because somebody changed the way that the morning looked, right? And so those of you who didn't know got here and you went, that's blocked. And I'm not sure what to do. And you saw signs and you followed the signs and you adapted and you're here. So we know you're adaptable, right? You didn't just get to the little barricade and go, oh, I can't get in, I'm gonna go home. Right? Nobody did that. Well, maybe some people did. That may be why we have some empty seats, Danielle, right? We know who's not adaptable today based on who didn't come on in. Yeah. And so we know we're adaptable, and we know that our brains are not static. We know that they're still developing, that we can change our thinking, we can change our patterns, we can change our minds, literally, and physiologically. And so it's okay. We're just having to think about things a little differently with this kind of what we might even call extra time on our hands as we think about living longer. Now, I think it's interesting. I liked all these books have their little graphs, and this one I took out of a book called Life Forward or Living Forward. And I made up my own, so don't laugh, I'm not a graphic designer, but here's what mine looks like. I feel like that's too linear. So this is kind of what I think life kind of looks like, right? And in particular, I put the age groups on there based on relationships and whatnot. So you have childhood, you have adolescence, young adulthood, middle age, and then old age. And then we die. That's kind of how life has looked, right? And the road is, pretty, not bad. But based on this new longevity trend, guess what life looks like? That's a little different, isn't it? So let's see if I can see this with my glasses, with my reading glasses on, looking at a distance. So we have childhood, we have young adulthood, adolescence, young adulthood, middle age, I call it upper middle age. Then you have senior adulthood, and then you have more senior adulthood, and then you have more senior adulthood, and then you have more senior adulthood, and then you get to old age. Follow me? What are you going to do with all that extra senior adulthood? Some of you are going to play. We talked about this in one of our earlier, topics earlier in the year, that retirement is no longer an option. Because you may retire from a job, but you need to pick up something else to do, right? So you may retire from something, but you need to retire to something else. And that's a really important fact. And so you notice that none of my little dots up here on the road include retirement. Because we're not talking about retirement anymore, right? You may leave a job, you may leave a career, you may get, you may do something different. But we're not calling it retirement, because what happens if you call it retirement? That means you are what? Retiring. And retiring means what? Doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. And what I know about you guys, because you're here, is that you're not doing absolutely nothing. You're doing things, and you're living life, and you're enjoying those extra years that we've been granted. So today's talk was primarily designed around new relationships. Originally, the way we conceptualized it, it was around new relationships. And what we know is that with new relationships, things change, don't they? And so I'm going to take a quick survey of the room, and you don't have to participate if you don't want to. This just might help me a little bit. But how many of you in the room are from, not your current family, but you grew up in a blended family. In other words, you had another parent, either through divorce and remarriage, or someone passed away and then your family remarried? Raise your hand. Okay? Wow, not very many. Okay, I'm in that camp. I grew up in a blended family. Okay, how many of you your kids grew up with a blended household because you have a secondary marriage? Raise your hand. Okay, more than the first group. Okay, and then how many of you right now have kids or grandkids or great grandkids that are growing up in a blended family? Raise your hand. Okay, even more. Right? See the trend? Okay, so and by the way, marriage in people over the age of 60 is trending upward, right? Because of all of those extra years that we have, people are finding that after being widowed or after divorcing, that they're creating new relationships and they want to be in relationship with someone rather than live their life alone. And there's no right or wrong to that, and nobody, by the way, here today, including and especially me, has any advice to give on that or judgment around that. It's just, it's up to you, right? Everybody's individual decision. And so what we know, though, is that sometimes this happens by accident. Does anybody know of a friend or family member or they themselves who lost a spouse and rekindled a relationship with somebody from their childhood or high school or college years? Raise your hand. Yeah. Happens all the time. In fact, a friend of ours she actually was our broker in our real estate office years and years ago, the one we were at the longest. When we were, we were baby realtors, and she raised us, she parented us, and was our broker. And when she and her new husband moved, we moved them down to Dallas when they were 80. But she and Rick he had lost his wife, and she had divorced many years prior. And they had gone to high school together at Northwest Classen. And they got back together, started dating, fell in love, and then married, and are still married today and living in Dallas. When they went to Dallas, moved into a beautiful high-rise continuing care retirement community there, found that there were 5 other couples living there in that community that all graduated from Northwest Classen High School around the same time they had. So they found like their little tribe right there in Dallas they knew one couple when they moved there, but they didn't know all the others, and it was interesting. And so I say that because we don't know really what life holds, right? We just don't know. And so today's conversation isn't about where you might be today. It might be for some of you, but it might be where life might lead you down the road, and we just don't know. Out of curiosity, you don't have to raise your hands. I'm just going to make this a rhetorical question, but I'm pretty confident that nobody in the room that's married got married expecting to get divorced. Right? I didn't. I was young when I got married, and I didn't expect to get divorced, and yet I did get divorced, right? And so most of us don't get married expecting to get divorced. Otherwise, we would probably not get married at all. Well, similarly, most of us don't anticipate getting into a relationship. It just kind of happens sometimes, right? Life happens, and we find ourselves in a relationship. So today's conversation is for those of you who are thinking down the road about the what ifs. And we talked, some of our other seminars we've had are on widowhood. Some of you came to our seminar with the ladies on the stage that talked about becoming widowed and what that's like. We're going to be talking later in the year, I think a couple months down the road, about men and what it's like to be widowed as a male. And so we're expanding our conversation into the what ifs, and a lot of these are lessons learned from other people that have been there before us. But for today's conversation, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, not the political elephant, although that is on my slide now that I look at it. It's kind of funny. That was not intended. So the elephant in the room is that there are certain topics that people do not talk about for a variety of reasons, which I'll talk about in a second. But what are the big 3 that you know growing up and even into adulthood, the 3 things you don't talk about in social settings for fear of creating some sort of rift? What are they? Money, politics, and religion. right? Those are the three things that people just say, generally as a rule, don't talk about those things in social settings because it usually doesn't work out well, especially if you don't know who your circle is, right? Because somebody's going to get, crossways and you lose friends that way and so on and so forth. Well, so we were all taught that. I'm not really exactly sure why. Unfortunately, that has extended into other things that people generally as a rule don't talk about, not just even in social circles though. They don't even talk about them in their own family. And those are family planning, like estate planning, what to do if something happens, funeral planning. I know Alec has been up here on stage before, our Buchanan funeral home guy. He's amazing. And he talks about how many families have not even talked about what that looks like until they get to their place to set up a funeral. And people don't talk about sex. They don't talk about relationships. They don't talk about what intimacy looks like as they get older. Fun, quick little story. You know me, I'm pretty transparent. Those of you are like, Nikki talks about anything. She has no boundaries. And I do have boundaries. They're pretty way out there though. And it was interesting, I'm 53 now, and I found out from my physician not too long ago that I'm in full-on menopause, right? Oh, yay! The ladies in the room are going, oh, I get it. Men in the room are going, oh, poor Chris. Right? And they're probably right, to be honest. But so here's the thing though, when I found that out, I didn't really know what to do with that information. And Chris and I talk about everything, so we have no problem talking about that kind of stuff. That is, open door in our household. He doesn't always like it, but it is an open door, right? But I grew up, my mom passed when I was 11, and my grandmother passed when I was 13. And my other grandmother was disabled, and so we didn't have these kind of conversations. And my aunts, who are all also from a small town, they don't talk about anything in public. Like, you do not talk about that stuff at all. It is taboo, you don't talk about that. So I was like, well, who am I gonna talk to about this? So I asked somebody at lunch the other day. Danielle and I took a couple of ladies to lunch. Actually, the women who were up here on stage that day talked about widowhood. I thought, you know what, they're pretty open and candid. I had some great conversations. I'm gonna ask them about menopause. And you know what, one of them said, didn't you ask your mom? And I said, well, I would, but she's not here. Well, what about your grandma? I said, well, I would, but she's not here. And so I was like, who can I talk to about this stuff, right? And you can go on the internet if you want to scare the living daylights out of yourself, right? I mean, I was pretty sure I had all kinds of dementia and Parkinson's and everything else based on what I read on the internet. And so I began to think, what circles, what groups can I talk to? I talked to my mother-in-law, she's amazing, she'll talk to me about things. But guess what, as I've learned, everybody's had a different experience with that, right? Yeah, so there is no answer to a question. You basically have to talk to enough people to find out what the field of experience, what the breadth of experience is with that. Or you talk to a professional in a field who has helped many people to help you decide, is this normal? Whatever normal is. Or is this outside of the boundaries of normal and you should have this checked out, right? Well, physicians do that, right? But how much time do you get with your physician when you go visit them? Give or take 5-10 minutes, right? And by the way, they only want to talk to you if you have a problem, usually, unless you're there for your annual visit, which you maybe get 10 or 15 minutes, right? But they're going through a checklist. And so I literally had to say to my female physician, PA, I literally had to say to her, stop for a minute, look at me, I have questions. Right? Because she wanted lab work and da-da-da. Guess what? Here's where you are and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, great, stop. I have questions. And she goes, oh, okay, what are your questions? I said, I have a list. She's looking at her watch. I'm like, this is going to take a minute. And I made her sit there and answer all of my questions until I realized that I probably at that point exceeded my maximum allotted time and might need to schedule another appointment. My point is, I'm pretty bold and direct. How many of you in the room agree that Nikki's pretty bold and direct? Yep. All right, I know from my experience of talking with many of the people in this room that the vast majority of people out there are not as bold and direct as I might be. And so what happens is these conversations do not get had. And so I'm going to talk about why conversations, not just about health. I mean, I gave my example. That's a pretty normal thing that women go through. But there are things that aren't typical that terrify people to talk about. And I'm going to talk about some of those today. So when we think about why we avoid certain conversations, we have to ask ourselves, what has our upbringing been, right? Where did we get this reluctance to have hard conversations? And there's some people that I know who can't even have these conversations with their spouse. Their spouse either doesn't want to talk about it, or they can't bring it up with their spouse for whatever reason, or their partner. And so unfortunately these conversations go unhad. And so shame is one of them. Growing up, I remember my family when I was younger and started dating, and my older stepbrother ratted me out and told my parents he thought that I was sexually active. And I'll never forget, they brought me in, they said, we're putting you on birth control. And I said, wait a minute, don't you want to hear my side of the story? And they said, nope, you're on birth control, we're putting you on birth control. And I'm like, well, wow, oh, okay. And I'm in a small town. I graduated with 36 people in my class. That's how small town. I remember vividly going and my stepmother saying, you don't go pick it up, I'll go pick it up, it's in my name. So you're going to be on birth control, it's going to be in my name, and I'm going to go pick it up for you because why? We wouldn't want what? Anybody to know. We wouldn't want anybody to know. Well, they pretty much knew, it was a small town. But my parents were under the illusion that people didn't know. Now, I'm sharing a little dirty laundry here. My dad would be appalled. And yet, when you grow up hearing over and over and over again, what will people think? Don't talk about that. That's private. That's family business. Nobody should hear that, right? When you grow up hearing that, you question talking about certain things with everybody, about anything. I even have family members to this day I'm currently helping with some health issues and recovery from some surgery. And I wouldn't have known about it if my aunt wouldn't have taken a risk and said, Nikki, I need you to know about this because I'm going to need a little help. And her husband won't let me tell anyone. It put her in a terrible position. Here she is, she's going over, she's going to be sitting at Mercy Hospital while he has surgery with no one. She's going to be going home with him to small town America with no home health and no support, and having to be his nurse, which she is not a good nurse. She'll admit that. And she was not supposed to tell anyone. And I thought, what a tragedy that is. And so she told me. And she says, don't tell him I told you. I said, fair enough, I won't. I won't tell him that you told me everything. But I am going to tell him that I know, because he also needs support. And so I'm having to retrain my family. These are people in their 70s, mid-70s and older, who have been taught throughout their life that it's not okay to talk about even health issues. These are not sexual issues, these are not intimacy issues, these are not female problems or male problems, these are human problems. And yet, we're being told don't talk about them. And so now, let's add to the conversation, let's add the added bonus of new relationships. Now, a new spouse is on the scene, a new parent, a new step-parent, a new mom, a new dad, a new aunt, a new uncle, somebody you don't know, and you want to support them. And you add their belief systems to that conversation, right? Your family may be very open and very communicative about things, which I hope they are, and I'm grateful if they are. And yet this new person comes in and says, oh, really don't want you to talk to the family about this. And you're used to the family talking about things, and now all of a sudden, guess what? You're being kept out. That can feel really awkward, right? There's an imbalance, like what do they say in Star Wars? There's an imbalance in the universe, or is that Star Trek? I'm not a Trekkie, so. But it feels weird. The relationships are off. And so you add new relationships to the equation, it's harder to talk about certain things. So I think you understand all of those things. So I have a few truths. You guys know I'm all about truths, right? So I have 2 or 3 truths I'm going to share with you today, and then we're going to talk about some specifics. Thank you, Chris. There's a disturbance in the force. He text messaged me from the back of the room. Thank you. There is a disturbance in the force. I love it. Okay. Truth number 1, there are certain realities in this world that people avoid talking about, even when they are important. They are considered taboo. Not talking about them, we may be putting ourselves and those we love at risk or causing undue stress or worry. And we think about, oh, well, it's just private. Well, what is the result of that remaining private? What are the ramifications of that? And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those. Truth number 2, despite living longer lives, many of which are complicated by new relationships and the blending of families, critical topics such as estate planning issues, end-of-life wishes, financial circumstances, caregiver expectations, family health and mental health issues, and sexuality and intimacy remain taboo, ultimately causing a variety of negative outcomes for generations to come. Not just for the current group of people dealing with these, but for the next generation that's going to be dealing with these things later. Add to that list, by the way, mental health issues, right? Mental health issues. We know that right now, our world, every family that I've ever talked to pretty much has somebody, if not in their direct family, it's in their extended family, has some sort of a mental health challenge that they're facing. And I'm not just talking about dementia and Alzheimer's. I'm talking about all of the other mental health issues that can be anxiety and depression and bipolar and schizophrenia and you name it, right? There are all of these things that we deal with as human beings that have been taboo and brushed under the rug, and yet they have to be dealt with. I have a family member with, actually 2 family members, different families entirely, that have bipolar disorder. And nobody would know it until they're manic. Does anybody know anybody with bipolar disorder? Yeah, so when someone has bipolar disorder, it's an extreme shift in moods. Okay, so, and it's unpredictable. It's manageable with medication, but oftentimes they don't stay on their medication, and so they have a manic or depressed episode. Well, for me, it was interesting. I didn't know that one of my family members had this particular disease. It's a brain disease. And I didn't know, I just knew they had some issues that they dealt with until I was smack dab in the middle of helping family members deal with those issues during a manic episode. And this person had been diagnosed with this for over 10 years and had multiple manic episodes. And I'm finding out about this when I am literally taking this person to the hospital. And I'm looking at some old documents, like old medical records, and it had the diagnosis of bipolar on there. And I asked the family that was her caregiver, I said, how am I just hearing about this? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, how am I just hearing that she has bipolar disorder? What do you mean bipolar disorder? I'm like, it's right here. It says, this is the diagnosis. They weren't even clear about what that was. Okay, bipolar disorder, great. What does that mean? They never looked it up. They never did the research. They didn't know it was chronic. They didn't know it was recurring. And I am both surprised and not surprised all at the same time, because this is the same family that you don't get to talk about health issues. And so mental health has got to be on that list, right? Because guess what? That not only affects the current family, the nuclear family that they're in, it affects the extended family, because guess what? Somebody is going to need to care for this person and assist them as they have these things happen over time. And if you don't know it exists, you can't even really help. Those of us who want to be helpful, and I know most of you in this room are, you're caregivers by nature. That's why you're here, you're learning, right? And you want to care for people, but if they won't talk about it, how can you help them, right? And so that's a big one for me. So why are they avoided? Fear, shame, embarrassment, cultural norms, gender norms, corporate and institutional biases. You know, some of us were taught through our particular religious doctrine that you don't talk about certain things, or certain things are right or wrong. Certain of us were taught by our families, by our caregivers, by our mentors. And I remember hearing, you know, obviously, you know, in my family, you didn't live together outside of marriage. That was not okay. And yet lots of people were doing it. And I didn't understand what the right and wrong was behind that. And my family really couldn't explain it to me. And in my family, it wasn't scriptural. Like, for some of you, you'll say, well, it's scriptural, and that's what I believe. It's part of my religious beliefs. And that's okay, but my family never said that. They never quoted scripture. They never said that's what we believe because this is our faith. They just said it's not right. It's not okay. Now, at 17, 18, 19 years old, I wanted to know what? Why? Why? Explain it to me, please. Now I understand. I'm 53 years old. I get it. Big mistake. Big mistake, right? But at the time, you tell me not to do something, and by my very nature, what was I going to do? The exact opposite. Just ask my dad. But if you couldn't give me a valid reason, and at 18, 19, 20 years old, most valid reasons are irrelevant anyway, right, Diane? Right? You can tell an 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, you can give 20 reasons, faith being one of them, and I'm not so sure they're going to listen. But now we're grown, we're adults, we have some maturity, we're in the second or third act or fourth act of life. Now we understand all of those mistakes we made as young people. But here's the kicker. Are you ready? That list still exists. Anybody that felt those feelings at 18, 19, 20, unless you have done an immense amount of personal growth work, you still have those same feelings. They're unconscious. You may not even know they're there. But many of you have them. And the reason I know that is there are so many groups out there who are helping people deal with these kinds of issues. I come to a group on Monday nights here at Crossings, and it's a group of women. They have men's groups too, and I am blown away at how much support there is for people who are struggling with these questions, and yet I'm also blown away about how few people know about them. And fun, quick kind of story, and kind of a little plug for what they're doing here, is that this group, when I showed up, I was actually coming to support a family member. Like, I knew that this family member needed help, and I didn't really need help. I'm fine. I'm completely okay. Nikki is okay. So I came to the orientation, and I listened to what this was about, and I went, maybe I could benefit from some of this stuff. Because I have some of these, I'm hearing some things that people are saying that sound a lot like me. And so I decided to join the group too. This was back in January. Joined the group, and this group, by the way, I think they were used to having like a group of about 20 or so people. And this group, I think, had close to 100 women. The circle, like they literally changed rooms 3 or 4 weeks in a row because the circle got big. Right? So when you have that many people, and they had to go recruit more volunteers, I mean, they had to do a lot of things to accommodate this large group of women. And as I'm sitting there one night, after being there 3 or 4 weeks, I thought, thank goodness, first of all, for the program, but how sad it is that we have to have one. And even more so, how sad it is there's 100 women sitting in this room who are mostly 30 and older, I would say. Not a lot of younger women, not a lot of 20-somethings in there. By and large, my age or older, dealing with these issues right here. Shame, embarrassment, uncertainty. And these are faithful women. These are women who go to church. These are people who are professed Christians, who serve regularly. These are not people off the street. These are educated people. They're people sitting in this room. We all look alike. And yet, and then there's another whole room somewhere in the building of men doing the exact same thing. And so, guys, I would say to you that part of the problem and part of why these groups are so beneficial is they provide an outlet for you to talk about this stuff in a safe place. If my stepmother, who has been deceased now for many years, if my stepmother knew what I was talking about in this group, she would be rolling over in her grave, right? Seriously. Because I am sharing deeply from my heart and my soul some things that I struggle with. And I'm sharing them with women who are sitting there looking at me and shaking their heads and going, I get you. I get you. Right? They've either been there, or they are there, or they know somebody who has, or they've helped somebody who has, and they get it. And part of the problem is that we as a society aren't talking about these things. Now, again, lots of reasons. Doesn't matter, we can talk about them. So let's talk about one that is first and foremost on a lot of people's minds. I'm sure y'all think about this daily, right? Daily. STDs. STDs. Okay, here's something that you need to know. And again, I'm not a sex expert, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical person. I'm a researcher. I research the heck out of things, and Chris will tell you that I go down money trails that nobody has ever imagined before. Hours and hours and hours of reading things because I'm so intrigued by some of the things that we just miss, right? And so this one is particularly interesting. This is about STDs and the rise of STDs. If you're not sure what an STD is, it's a sexually transmitted disease in older adults. And there are speculations as to why there's an increase, which we don't need to get into today. But here's the problem, is that we know there's a rise of STDs, and we know that people are affected by it. And guess who is not even willing to talk to them about it? Their doctors, right? Physicians are not bringing it up. And physicians, and think about the age of your physician. Some of you may be going to a physician that's in your age range, but I've gone to a few physicians lately that could be my children. They're 30. They're 30. In your case, maybe your grandchildren, right? They're 30. A 30-year-old physician, general practitioner doctor, or even a female doctor is not going to ask you about your sex life. They don't want to talk about their own sex life. They're not going to talk to you about yours. Or they don't think you are having one. Because you're what? Old. And it doesn't matter how old you are, you're old because you're older than them. And so they're not talking to people about it, and as a result, people are, number one, not protecting themselves in some cases. In other cases, they're not getting fulfillment out of their life, sex life, or otherwise with their partner. And unfortunately, there are things out there now that can help people have a better sex life, right? I mean, let's be honest, everybody knows, because guess what now? The pharmaceutical companies are even advertising on television, right? How many of you have seen the commercials on television and you're sitting there with your grandkids or your kids watching the commercial going, oh heavens no. Right? Like, please don't ask me what that is, right? See, I'm literally, when the carrot commercial came out and the curved carrot, I about fainted. And I thought, wow, we have come a long way. We're advertising this kind of stuff on television now. Again, go back, my embarrassment, what I was taught, you don't talk about these things in public. They're certainly not on television unless you're watching a channel you shouldn't be watching. And yet, pharmaceutical companies are advertising for drugs to help with certain things that we won't talk about, or our physician won't talk with us about. Follow me? I've looked up a couple of articles I thought were interesting. Of course, there's scads of them, scads of articles about this topic. Just Google it. But one of the ones that I found most interesting was, this was from 2023, and it says sexual activity of older adults, let's talk about it. And it's an article for doctors, and there are 3 misconceptions that they have that cause them to not talk to people who are their patients about sex. And one of them is, the first misconception is that older adults are neither sexually active nor interested in sex, so there's no reason to ask them. The second one is that they assume the term sex refers only to partnered sex and intercourse, which is not the reality for many older adults who adapt their sexual activity because of erectile dysfunction, vaginal dryness, arthritis, mobility limitations, effects of medication, or serious health conditions. Some of you just now shrunk in your chair. I saw it. I used words in public in a church. I used these words, and some of you went, I can't believe she's talking about this. I know you did. I couldn't believe I was talking about it either, so it's all good. So the third misconception is that older adults are not at risk of sexually transmitted diseases, and therefore there is no need to ask about their sexual history or discuss their sexual behaviors. Every once in a while you'll catch an article that'll come out in the media about a senior living community who has had an outbreak of STDs. A long-term care community, an assisted living, or a 55 and older community. And they'll make a big deal out of it. Guess what? You can still be sexually active and live in a retirement community. It happens, right? And in fact, there's another article I thought was really interesting. This one is from and published by the Ohio Department of Aging Ombudsman Program. If you don't know what the long-term care ombudsman program is, it's basically the volunteer advocacy program for residents living and families living in long-term care. And they basically help mediate between issues that family members or residents are having and the operators of that community. And so they're advocates, right? And they're there to try to help out. And so this was written for that group. And there are 3 myths on here. First myth, sex is for the young and attractive. Myth number 2, older adults are unable to have sex because their bodies are too old or sick. And myth number 3, nursing facility residents with dementia or Alzheimer's shouldn't have sex. I'm going to focus on the third one. The fact under the myth says residents with cognitive impairments such as dementia and Alzheimer's have the same rights as other nursing facility residents. When a cognitively impaired resident indicates the desire to be sexually expressive, it becomes necessary for the resident's interdisciplinary care team to assess the level of capacity to determine the benefits or potential harm associated with the expression. Each sexually related occurrence is unique and should be looked at individually. So you have this group of people living together in a memory care community, basically, right, with cognitive impairments, and there's sex going on. And the question is this person, do they have capacity to be having sex, or are they being forced to have sex, right? That's really what they're asking. Because a lot of memory care now, they're splitting people up. You have female and male areas for that reason. But the reality of it is, just because someone has dementia doesn't mean that they are not having urges to be intimate with people. And the question is, do we stop them or do we not? And it's a hard answer. There's no right or wrong answer. That's why the ombudsmen are having to deal with it, because operators who own and operate assisted living and long-term care and memory care communities are having to deal with these questions. Well, guess what? If you're from a family who has never been okay about talking about sex, and your mom or your grandma or your sister or your spouse is now in a memory care community, and you were brought in to talk about their sexual exploits, you're gonna have a hard time with that, right? It's gonna be a hard conversation. It's gonna be a hard conversation for the 30-year-old nurse who's talking to you about it, the operator who's concerned that they're going to get sued because your spouse who has memory issues is expressing sexuality in the community where they live. It's going to be a very difficult conversation. And I'm telling you that you better be prepared for it, because if you're going to have a spouse in any type of community like that with cognitive impairments, sexual expression does not just disappear because of that. And it's hard for people to talk about. It's hard for them to understand. There was as a part of a class that I taught at SNU on an adult studies class, we watched a series of videos, and one of them was it was an overseas video, I can't remember where, but they interviewed several spouses with their spouses in memory care, and one particular spouse had, in memory care, had developed a relationship with one of the other residents, and was now perceiving this other resident, male resident, as being her spouse or her significant other, and they were sexually active in the community. This presented a lot of issues, as you can imagine. If you are a faith-based person, is this an affair? If you're a faith-based person, is this grounds for divorce? If you're so inclined, you ask yourself, is this community, are they responsible to keep this person from having those arrangements? And if these arrangements are making that person happy, should I be okay with that? I can't even imagine the emotions, right, that go on in the mind of the person who's saying, how can I possibly deal with this? And when you go to visit and that person introduces you to their significant other, when you're their significant other, right? Awkward. And I know a lot of people who are dealing with memory care issues, and Herb, who's my favorite support group leader in the whole world with the Alzheimer's Association, isn't here today, but he's got his other half back here, his cohort with him. I will tell you that they deal with these issues in support groups all the time. And if you're dealing with these kinds of things, you have got to talk to someone about them who gets it. Like, you can't be talking to people about it who don't get it, because if you're talking about a friend to a friend about it and they don't get it, you're going to get all kinds of bad advice. And so you have to talk about people who understand the disease, they understand the relational issues, right? So there are people who can talk to you about these things, and if you're already reluctant to talk about these issues because of, just our cultural norms, then you've got to find a safe place to do that, right? So I want to talk a little bit about the scammers, and then I'm going to talk about one or two other things, and then I'll open it up for things that you want to talk about, if any specific ones. This one is very problematic. In fact, Tara Hardin with the SALT Council and Triad talks about these things regularly at a number of her talks that she does around the city. But I wanted to talk about it today because this one is, you would think, okay, this is about money, right? Romance scammers steal a record of $547 million, on average like $9,000 per person scammed. That's a lot of people. But here's the problem with this. You think, okay, this is about money. So you've got somebody who is going online, they're lonely already, they want to meet somebody new, they're optimistic, and they start scrolling, right? And they start swiping left. And that's what they tell me you do. I don't really know. I watch shows. And what I've found is that the people who are being scammed on this, guys, are people who truly think that that person loves them. They've never met them before, but they connect with them online, and then that person basically creates a relationship with them. It's fake. By the way, in many cases, the person is made up, right, that they're communicating with. They think it's a real person, but it's literally a person sitting in a bank of computers, a bunch of cubicles overseas somewhere in a building, and they are literally pretending to be in love with these people. And there are documentaries on it. I would encourage you to watch them and be familiar with this. My dad actually fell victim to this. Fortunately, he asked about it before he lost any money. But I knew he was on a dating app. He had been for a while. And he told me one day, he said, I met somebody, and he said, I've been communicating with her. She lives in North Carolina. Are you sure, Dad? Yes, he's sure. Okay. I said, okay. So I didn't talk about it at the time, asked about it a little bit later. He goes, yeah. He said, so, I meant to tell you. And I thought, oh, this is not going to be good. He said, I meant to tell you that my friend that I've been talking with from North Carolina wants to come out and meet me. I said, great. When's she going to come? He said, well, she's asking me if I'll send her some money to buy a plane ticket. Red flag. I said, Dad, she's not coming. He said, what do you mean? I said, the reason she's asking for money is this is a scam, and people tell you that they need money to get where they're going or for whatever reason, and by now you care about her because you've been talking with her and sharing things, I'm sure, that are very personal, and I'm going to tell you that this person is not real. And he said, no, Nick, I'm pretty sure she's real. Like, you know, she's got kids, and she's got grandkids, and she sent me pictures, and he showed me this string of text messages. I said, Dad, have you ever talked to her on the phone? Like in person on the phone, like voice to voice? No. Have you ever asked to? He said, yeah, I've asked several times if we could talk on the phone. And I said, well, why don't you? And he said, well, she's just really never in a place she can talk. I said, yeah. And my heart hurt. I mean, my heart hurt because I knew how desperate he was for a relationship. And so I had to share with him some articles and things that, you know, I knew about that proved that these people were doing what they're doing. And I convinced him to not send her money and to delete the app and to delete the text messages and to discontinue the relationship. I think I convinced him. I'm not really sure. Because my dad is a perfectly capable human being. I do not oversee his finances. I do not oversee his affairs. And so guess what? He may have sent her money. I don't know. And guys, my dad is a smart man. He's not incapable. He runs a business. But people are being scammed by this every day. Now, my dad, he's going to get his feelings hurt. He's upset. He feels like he feels dumb, right? All those things. But I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to take it a step further. We know of another person, a friend of a family member, who he fell victim to the same type of scam, only he did send money, lots of it. He invested money with this person. Lost his house, his entire retirement savings, broke, moved in with a family member, borrowed money from her, only to find out that he'd been scammed, drove over to Lake Hefner, put a gun to his head, and killed himself. We're not talking about this stuff enough, you guys. It's not okay that somebody kills himself because some scammer from Nigeria or Asia or Europe somewhere or anywhere is doing this to people. It's not okay, but we're not talking about it. Why? Shame, embarrassment, fear, all the things. We've got to talk about it. We've got to be talking about it. And you got to share. You know, if my dad had not said something to me about that day, it was a risk for him to say that, right? It was a risk for him to tell me about that, and it was a risk for me to have to tell him that it was a scam. I think he thought maybe, or he wouldn't have told me. Like, he had a clue. But how many people are not telling their kids? How many of you in this room right now are in an online relationship with somebody you think is real, or your family member is, and you're not telling anybody to help you check it out? We are trusting people. And we're from Oklahoma, for crying out loud, right? We trust people. We're good people. We stop when people are stuck on the side of the road. We help them change their tire. We give them $20 for gas. We give them rides. We don't ask for anything in return. People in other cities, by the way, in states don't do that. In many cases, I've learned. You better have AAA when you go to New York. But here we do these kind of things, and so guess what? Where do they prey on people? They prey on people who are trusting, and they prey on people who are vulnerable. And when we're lonely, we're vulnerable. Period. Okay? I want to talk about this. This is in my wheelhouse, real estate. We see this a lot. And this is not about scams, by the way. There are plenty of scams. We've talked about those in other forums. I'm not going to talk about those specifically right now. I'm going to talk about housing. And those of you in the room who are in second relationships or think you might ever be in a second relationship, one of the things that we're learning and finding regularly now is that as people blend their households, so spouses pass, they rekindle a high school love, they start dating, they decide to get married, they decide to blend their households. The question is, whose house do we live in? Yours or mine? Or do we get rid of both of them and get a new one? Okay, that's usually the question. And there's different people do different things. Well, so what happens, and this is for the ladies in the room, and I'm sure it can happen to men, I just haven't seen it happen. But here's what happens. The women tend to move into the man's household, or they get a new house together, and the man buys it. That's just partially our culture and the age ranges of the people I'm dealing with are now, let's say they're in their 80s. This is the men typically were in charge of the purchase of the property. It was just culturally and gender norms say that's how you do it. Now in my generation, that's not how it's done, but prior to me it was. So what's happening is that when we go to help people sell their homes, what we're finding in many cases is that the female, the wife, is not on the deed. They moved into the husband's house, and they don't own that house at all. Now, they may have some legal standing as an owner of that house, but I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to get into that. But here's what happens is, what happens if he dies?
The kids get it.
It depends on what their state is set up. But if you let the state decide what happens, because you don't have an estate plan, then often what we're finding is that that woman who has been married to this person for maybe 15 years or more is now homeless. Because the kids are going to get rid of the house, and they have absolutely no loyalty to her whatsoever because she's not mom. And we're seeing more and more women homeless. I say homeless, they move in with their kids, or they move into a small apartment that they can afford or whatever, because when they got married, the spouse said, I will take care of you. And they do take care of them quite well while they're alive, but once they're passed, they did not make any provisions to take care of them beyond that. And so I'm talking with a lot of women that are, they're saying, I don't know who owns our house. And they're having private conversations because they are not willing to ask their spouse who owns the house. So, what do? You got to have the conversation. So if you're thinking about getting married and you're thinking about combining households, somebody should probably sit down together, the couple, with an attorney, and you should ask these questions, right? What do I own? What do I not own? If we buy this house together, how do we make sure that we're fair to each other? And whether that's to your kids or to yourselves, everybody's circumstances are different. We've told our kids not to expect anything. Just don't expect anything. Truthfully. Now, there may be something there, but I don't care if there is or isn't. I don't want them to expect it, because here's what happens. Mom, dad, spouse passes away, they marry, new relationship, both have adult children. Those adult children are worried. What are they worried about? My inheritance. Yep. Uh-oh, dad's getting married to the gold digger. Gold digger's going to get all of our inheritance. Dad, you have your estate plan in place? These kids over here, they're like, you know what, mom doesn't have any money, dad left her broke. She's marrying this rich guy, that's great, we're off the hook. Yay, yay for us. They're happy. Now, both couples may have money, right? Man and woman both have money coming into this relationship together. Maybe they have an estate plan, maybe they don't. Guess which spouse's kids come out better? The last living spouse, her kids or his kids come out better if there's no estate planning done. Right? Think about that for a second. And we don't know which one's going to go first, do we? Nobody knows. And so families are literally having no conversations around this. Or if they are having conversations, you know where they're having the conversations? Not with the parents. They're having the conversations with themselves or with their families, but they're not having the conversations with their parents. And you may be saying, well, they better not come talk to me about it because I'm not talking to them about it. It's none of their damn business. That's what most people tell me. It is none of their business. And you're right. It's not any of their business. So do your estate plan and then tell them to get out of your business. But if you don't have an estate plan, it is their business. Because guess who's going to have to deal with your estate after you're gone? Right? And we've had a few families that this has happened this year. Shannon talked about it last month. We've had many families that didn't do their estate plan, and the disposition of the house is in question. Who owns it? Who gets to sell it? Who gets the money out of it? All of those things. But I'm less concerned about after somebody's gone, because it is just about money. I'm more concerned about when somebody's still living, is where are you going to live? And so if you're not having these conversations, and women historically in the room, guys, women in the room, you know that historically women are not going to talk about money. They don't like to bring it up, and I don't really know why. It's a generational thing. But at the end of the day, women have got to start asking about money. And it's not about greed, and it's not about, getting yours. It's about, am I going to be provided for when you're gone? Because here's what happens. Woman sells her house, liquidates her entire estate, moves in with the man. Her money is used for whatever else they use it for. And when it's gone, it's gone. And unless that person has provided for her, when he passes, she has no money to go buy another house. And now she's homeless, and so guess what? Right? So here we go. So this is what I'm saying. These are conversations that have to be had. So who do you talk to? I'm going to just talk about some of the people that you may not have thought about. A lot of these you have thought about. But, I was talking with Lance at Crossings about this topic a while back and some of the challenges with it. And, as pastors, the church has people come in all the time to talk about things. And they can help, and they can listen, and they connect you to the right people. But sometimes the conversations aren't about technical issues or practical issues. They're about spiritual issues. Is it okay to move on? Is it okay to remarry? If my wife is in the nursing home and she's been in the nursing home and she's unable to even recognize who I am, or she's in memory care and cognitively we can't have a relationship, is it okay for me to be in another relationship? And those are questions that you need to be talking to your spiritual advisor about. Those are questions that you have to grapple with. Is it okay that my spouse introduced me to her new husband at the memory care unit this week? You need to go talk to your spiritual advisors about these things and confide in them, because many of these issues are higher power issues. These are not things that we can deal with at our level. You're talking with your family members. I already mentioned that. First and foremost, your spouse. If you've not had these conversations with your spouse, do that, please. But also close friends and confidants. If you don't have close friends and confidants, I know some people are struggling to create their circle, I would encourage you to get with villages and talk with them about how you can get involved in some of their groups and meet some people, right? Get to know them. I want to tell a quick story about that, but I'll come back to it. Support groups. Here at Crossings, they have a ton of them. You don't have to be a member of Crossings to attend most of these. These are open to the community. Physicians and nurses, tell them, I need time. Make a list. Mental health practitioners. Guys, there are some great clinical people out there that are licensed to do this. They're psychologists, they're licensed marriage and family therapists, they're licensed social workers. This is what they do. If you can't find a good one, ask around. You can get a referral from one of us. If you see one, you don't like them, try another one. There's good ones out there. Life coaches, spiritual counselors, law enforcement. If you think this is a law enforcement issue, you feel like you've been duped, definitely you need to talk with law enforcement. Attorneys, guys, Jennifer is one of our favorite attorneys back here. She does estate planning. And the conversations she has to have with people, she does a phenomenal job of separating emotion from the technical aspects, the legal aspects, right? And so you can share with her all the things and all the emotions, but at the end of the day, she's going to say, what do you want? What do you need? Right? Specifically, how do you want this to go? And then she's going to do the documents based on that, right? And then, of course, financial. If you don't have a relationship with somebody who can look at finances with you, you've got to have that. Arvest does that all the time, and that's why they're one of our education partners. As part of their community outreach, you do not have to be an account holder at Arvest. they will sit down and meet with you and go over your finances. And if you're concerned about something on your finances, sit down with them and talk about it, because that's what they're there for. And it's private, it's confidential, it's safe, we know that they're reputable, and so on. Who you don't want to have that conversation with is the guy who calls you on the phone randomly to tell you that he's good at this. Because he probably is good at it, and you're going to be broke afterwards. Just saying, right? So all these things I'll share. I wanted to come back to a story that is very disheartening. So we talk about these online dating scams, right? The online dating scam, like my dad may have encountered, and yet these things happen in real life too. So I recommend like villages for your social stuff, the church for your social stuff, but we had a client years ago. She came to our seminars early on when we were over at the wellness center. I remember specifically she was 81 years old because she came up and told me that. You know, she came up proudly and she said, hi, and I'll call her Ann, that wasn't her name. She said, hi, I'm Ann, and I'm 81 years old. And I said, wow, you're amazing. I want to be you when I grow up. Like, what do you say to that, right? And she was very proud, and she was very well dressed, and she was very with it, and she just, she was a go-getter. She square danced. She had all these life activities. And so I love seeing her every month. And she continued to come. Well, one month she came up and she grabbed me and she said, I have good news. I said, what? I said, I can't wait to hear it. She said, I'm getting married. I'm engaged. And she had a big rock on her finger. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. That's awesome. When's the big day? Do you have a date? Well, we don't have a date set yet. We just got engaged. I just wanted you to know. And she says, and he's a lot younger than I am. I said, really? Do tell. Girls are talking. She said, he's only 65. And I went, oh, really? How'd you meet this guy? Now, my biases kick in, and I'm going, uh-oh. Now, she's beautiful, and she's fun, and she's active, but I know men, and most of the men in the room want a woman 20 years younger than them, not 20 years older. And I'm questioning now. So she said, I met him at Square Dance. And she gave me his name, and she said, and we get along, we have so much in common. And I said, great. I said, have you told your daughters you're engaged? Not yet. I'm not so sure they'll be as happy as you are. And I said, well, you may be right. And I said, but you do need to tell them, and you need to introduce them. Because when families blend, it's important that they know who he is, right? And I'm thinking to myself, oh, this is not good. And so she went on, and sure enough, long story, but I'll give you the short version. He was a con artist. He was had an accent, Irish accent. Had met her at square dancing. He swooned her, he courted her, got to know her. He moved in with her. They eventually sold her house. She bought a new house with his name on it. He began to isolate her. She quit coming to seminars. We call her, and she said, well, I can't come. Tom didn't want me to come this month. Tom's got something we're going to do. Tom kept her from seeing other people. He would answer her phone and tell her daughter she was unavailable. He isolated her. They moved out to the country out by Guthrie into on an acreage, and told her she couldn't drive anymore. It wasn't safe. She needed to stop driving. Shortly after, I talked to her on the phone occasionally, shortly after she began to tell me that he no longer was interested sexually. She goes, I don't know what happened. We got married and now he's not interested in me sexually. I don't know what I did wrong. So we reported it to APS. Before that, when we reported it, APS did an investigation. There wasn't anything they could do because she's of sound mind. He ended up taking her for everything. Basically got his name on all her accounts, took every bit of money she had. She started to develop some dementia. We don't know if it was real or induced somehow. Her daughters got involved, tried to get guardianship, took them to court, tried to get guardianship, couldn't even get guardianship because the court said she was of sound mind. This guy has her locked in a bedroom, basically, and got 3 in a house. He ruined her life. And she thought she was in love. Right? It happens. And it happens to good people. And that's why I say, lovingly, you don't have to tell your kids anything, you don't have to have them involved, but in some cases, you really do need to have your kids involved, and you need to have, or at least a close friend, a confidant, somebody you can trust to meet this person. Because I'm going to tell you, the first time I met him, she brought me to her house to list her house. I met him. He wasn't going to meet. He wasn't going to sit at the table with us. He sat in the living room. I said, well, isn't Tom going to sit with us? And she said, well, he says he doesn't have to sign anything, so you and I should just meet. I said, no, I'd really like to sit with him. I'd like to, if he has any questions, I'd like to answer them. He sat at the table with us, and I thought, you sucker. You just wanted to just beat him with a baseball bat. I could tell. I could tell. There wasn't anything I could do about it, right? She didn't believe me, like I told her. She didn't believe me. She was in love, right? And so, guys, I think earlier the better that you catch these people, and it's painful, but at the end of the day, we've got to talk to people about these things. So we've got a few minutes, and obviously we have a long list here. And today was not about just sex, right? Today was about, it's not about scams either. I'm going to say one more thing, and then anybody that has a question or comment, I'm happy to hear it. I would say this is about relationships, and originally the conception of this topic was about new relationships, right? Like those relationships were now gone and you've got new relationships, but this applies to all relationships, current relationships and any future relationships. And so I would hope, as we're talking and wrapping up today, take your piece of paper that you have, your handout, that front sheet, and I want you to write down. Don't just take that home and throw it in a pile. I want you to write down what are some things that you're currently not talking to people about that you should be, that you know you should be, or that you want to be, and who can you talk to about them? And it might be somebody on this list, or it might be somebody you know. But fill out that worksheet. I specifically did that with the intention of you taking that and using it as a guide for yourself, to ask yourself, because I'm going to be honest, there were some things that I thought I'm very open, I talk about things, but when I sat in that group of women one night, on a Monday night, we had a workbook that we work off of, and there were some questions in that workbook that we work through at home, and then we read our answers in the group. And I remember reading my answer, and I got to a specific part of the answer, and I stopped, and I went, I don't know if I can say this out loud, and everybody in the group went, it's okay. And I took a deep breath, and I blurted out the answer, and after I blurted out the answer, I went, it was something I probably should have said 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It was guilt and shame, right? And it came out because I was in a safe space. And by the way, there wasn't anything anybody in that room could say. By the way the group's set up, they don't say anything. At the end, they just say, thank you for sharing. Which is, what a blessing that is, right? I don't need your opinion. I don't need your solutions. I just need to know you heard me. And at the end of the day, guess what? I was 100 pounds lighter because I was able to say that to somebody. Or it could be that you don't need to say something. It could be that you need to ask somebody a question and get an answer to put your mind at ease. And if it's a new relationship, I'm going to just throw an example question out there. The example question is, have you ever had unprotected sex? If we're going to be together and we're going to have intimacy together, have you ever had unprotected sex? And that person's answer, you need to know. Because guess what? STDs are on the rise in older adults too. Because a lot of people, because you're not worried about getting pregnant, what happens? You don't use protection, and because you don't use protection, STDs are transmitted, right? So I'm not worried about anybody getting pregnant. I'm not worried about getting pregnant at this point in my life. So why would you use protection? Well, for STDs. But if you don't ask that person the question, if you don't go get tested, why do you think they do premarital testing for STDs? so that people don't spread it unknowingly, right? And so, I mean, it's just a practical question, but how hard is that question to ask? It's hard for a lot of people, but you gotta ask it. What other questions? So let's talk about in the room. Is there anything in the room that's on this list that somebody wants to either make a comment about or ask a question about? And you'll have to talk loud if you're making a comment that's long so that the room can hear you, because I don't have a mic. Yes, sir.
Went to a funeral just in the last month where it was the couple got married, both of them lost their mates. The one family wanted the male to pay for both their memory care, $7,300 a month for both of them, times two.
Yeah.
And they wanted to keep their house. Fortunately, the other family had taken precautions with a trust.
Yeah.
So it happens on both sides.
It does, for sure. So to your point, so guys, just on the care issue, right?
Yes.
So blended families, I'm going to extrapolate on what he said. So blended families, who's going to take care of who when the other person passes? And I'll be honest, I know there's some, I don't know if they're here today, but I've talked with several of you. There's a couple in the room that they're really grappling with how to care for their step-parent. And the step-parent, they care about the step-parent, they love them, their parent married them, but they're not their parent, right? Their actual parent. And so when that spouse dies, who's taking care of the step-parent? And that is something that has got to be discussed as families, because in many cases, guys, it's not because you don't love them or care about them, it's a financial commitment too. And if there are no provisions made for that, who handles that? And it's a big challenge. Thank you for that. Yes. Anybody else have comments, questions, or resources as well? I'm happy to hear them. Yes, ma'am.
I have a friend that her dad was in an assisted living, and the mother had died, and so he got a girlfriend there at the assisted living, but he believed that you couldn't have sex outside of marriage. So they were deciding to get married, and of course the family was going, oh no, you know, what's going to happen? Because they needed to be sure to take care of him in that assisted living as well as, and so that's also a dilemma,
It
you know,
is.
for the family, and because of relationships that do develop.
So to her point, assisted livings, and not just assisted, but any type of congregate care, whether it's independent living or memory care, etc. Mainly assisted living and independent living, because people are cognizant of what they're doing. They're making choices with agency involved. And so what's always interesting to me is families are in upheaval, right, about this. And so who handles that, right? Who's going to mediate that conversation? And a lot of this has to do with, again, goes back to the lack of conversations being had with families. And those of you, we have an education partner that's an assisted living organization, and Jonathan here is a guest of ours, has an assisted living. And there are a lot of people who get married that live in assisted living. Some people get married in assisted living and they stay there in their own apartments. Some people get into their own apartment. Some people get married and move out entirely. Guys, it is all about communication, and at the end of the day, if your parent is the one telling you, I found the love of my life, I didn't think this would ever happen, I'm going to get married, if your immediate reaction is, what about my inheritance? Then shame on you. I very rarely point my finger, but on that one I will. But if your reaction is, are you truly in love, and is this a healthy relationship, and if so, how can I best support you, then we're on the right track, right? But that's not usually the first thing that comes to people's mind. And so just ask yourself, how would I react if my parent, spouse, or parent, or someone, you know, and by the way, part of this comes from the lack of conversations about, like, for instance, parents and how they talk. So Chris and I, we've had lots of conversations about this because we do this for a living. We actually, so he and I said to him, if something happens to me and I pass before you, I want you to remarry if you choose, right? I want you to, if you choose. I don't want you to worry about what I would think about that. I want you to know what I would think about that. right? But I would want you to choose well. And I would want them to love our kids. That's my only requirement, right? So he knows what my requirement is. Now it's up to him to decide what he's going to do with that. I know what his rules are. He knows what mine are, right? What you got, Lance?
Hey, just one quick thing. You and I talked about this. I've seen some marriages from older people, remarriages go south pretty fast. And it's because they didn't talk about these things. I have 4 pages of questions that all come from marriages that have gone south fast. They're over here on this table.
Perfect.
I'm going to be driving a golf cart, drive people back to their car. But there's 2 sheets over here, and these come, and they ask a lot of them sexual.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bringing that. So Lance does premarital counseling here at Crossings, a lot of it. And so his questions he created, and he said basically it's because of people not having these conversations. So if you're, take one of those with you and look them over. And by the way, have those conversations in your own relationship. Yes, sir.
I think the kids have that person or the woman investigated to make sure they are a true person. And if there is money, there should be a prenup signed between the two.
So, to your point, for the rest of the room that couldn't hear that, if someone is in relationship and they aren't able to investigate it themselves online, their kids or someone they care about can investigate that online, find out if that person is a real person. He's recommending that people should have a prenup. Now, obviously, a prenuptial is a personal decision, but it's a great idea, even if you don't do one, why not sit down with an attorney to talk about doing one and ask all the questions, and then once you've decided, you can decide if you want one. Don't decide you want one or don't want one without having the conversation. Does that make sense? And if somebody, by the way, tells you, the significant other, the one that you're with, says, oh, we don't need a prenup, that should be a red flag. Right? We don't need to meet with an attorney. I'll take care of you. Should be a red flag in and of itself. Yes, Mr. Ross.
My mother has been widowed for several years. She remarried a very, very fine man. And after my mother passed on, and after my mother passed on, his children came out wanting part of the estate. He had settled all of his finances before he actually got married to my mother. The children had everything that was good, but they came out trying to get it. And in addition to that,
Don't worry, I'll repeat his.
in addition to that, jewelry and things like that
Right.
in the house
Yeah.
that I tried to get into a lot of boxes and
Yeah.
and this little thing here, my family member, my brother was living there and in the house. And then that began to disappear. The whole family and his children came into the house. So anything of that, we should get photographs of it. And,
So to just repeat, paraphrase what he's talking about, there's 2 parts to this. The first part is estate planning before marriage, because after the spouse passes, that estate plan can be modified. Whatever it was is there, right? So the prenup or the estate plan associated with the prenup needs to be done by an attorney. That's not something you want to do yourself. Secondarily, his point is when someone passes away, if there's blended families, think about this. If it's your mom, for instance, she remarried, or it's you and your kids are coming in and you've passed, jewelry, things like that have some sort of sentimental value or family heirlooms, oftentimes, if that is not addressed in the will or in the estate plan, they're fair game. And unfortunately, guess what happens is there's somebody in that family, even if the spouse was an amazing person and a good person, doesn't mean all their children are. And so those children come in for the wake or for the viewing, and guess what? They leave with all the jewelry. Right? Does that make sense? And I hate to say that, but it happens all the time. So you have to take caution and take care of those things if they're important to you. Now, I have an opinion, and then I'm going to close with this thought. People are more important than the stuff they own. And I've kind of looked back at some of our talks, and we've spent an inordinate amount of time talking about estate planning, to deal with our stuff after we're gone, haven't we? Necklaces and jewelry and boats and cars and things we own and houses we own. What would happen? We'll just speculate. What would happen if we worried more about the relationships that people have and making those work and helping people live out the rest of their life, that long road at the end? What would happen if we focused on making that long road at the end amazing, instead of focusing on whether or not I'm going to get the ring or the car or the crap? Because it's really, at the end of the day, it's all just stuff, guys. What would happen if we focused on that? And we still have time, the people in this room still have time to teach our kids to focus on that instead of the stuff, right? Because at the end, yeah, so thank you for that. So, guys, at the end of the day, here's it. Nobody gets to take it with them. And so they think passing it on to their kids, and their kids think they're entitled to it because they've been taught that they were going to get it. And used to, they needed it because they were going to run the family farm, and so the family passed the farm down to them, and they needed that. But now, most of our kids are richer than we are, and they don't need it. And so at the end of the day, let's quit talking about the stuff so much, and let's worry about how do we make sure our new spouse loves our grandkids? How do we make sure our new spouse is introduced to our kids in a way that we can have Christmas together and make it enjoyable? How can we do that? That might make a bigger difference in the end of the day, right? You've got some things coming up, guys. That's the end of my talk. Here are the things we have coming up real quick. Next month, right here, The Truth About Transitions, Home, Money, and Mindset. This will be a panel of professionals that are going to talk about moving, transitioning, whatever that looks like to you as it relates to money and how we think about it in our house. And then we also have Senior Life Skills Learning. This is a Villages program. It's on Mondays throughout the year. The two coming up, you can also get a flyer back there at the table for that. Shannon and the team at Buckaloo Group and OKC Mature Moves are doing a talk called OMG, We Have Two Houses, What Do We Do? So those people who have two houses, and one of them right now is serving as a storage container because you've moved into the other one with somebody else, probably need to deal with that. Shannon's going to speak to that issue. And then I'm going to be speaking with Nerve Renewal, has asked us to be a special guest, and with them at the Healthy Living Center in September. So you can pick up a flyer from them about that. That's going to be a fun talk. I'm really not sure what Mark's going to have me talk about, but whatever it is, it's going to be interesting, right? Did you guys get something out of today? It was a random talk, right? Thanks for being here. Give yourself a